He kept his distance as she entered a rundown daycare center, when three identical 3-year-old girls ran crying, "Mommy's here!" While she counted her last dollars for late fees, his world turned upside down. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel, and let's get started. Nashville, 2009. Rain hammered against the windows of Avery Williams's small South Side apartment, the rhythmic patter echoing the thundering of her heart. Her hands trembled as she stared at the pregnancy test on the bathroom counter, its single pink line having multiplied into 2 while she'd paced anxiously in her tiny kitchen. Positive. Avery's knees weakened, forcing her to sit on the closed toilet lid. At 23, she had plans. Modest ones, perhaps, compared to the dreams of others, but they were hers. She'd been saving for community college, working double shifts at the Whiskey Blue Bar to build something better than the paycheck-to-paycheck existence she'd known since leaving her foster home at 18. And then there was Michael Thornton. Her mind drifted to their first meeting 8 months ago. It had been an unusually quiet Tuesday at the bar when he walked in, his tailored suit immediately marking him as out of place among the regular blue-collar crowd. Michael had later confessed he'd been escaping yet another stuffy corporate dinner, seeking somewhere his family's name meant nothing. "Something low-key," he'd said, sliding onto a bar stool with a disarming smile. "Somewhere I can just be myself." Whatever himself was, it had captivated Avery from the first conversation. Unlike the other suited men who occasionally slummed at Whiskey Blue, Michael asked questions about her, real ones, and actually listened to her answers. He came back the next night, and the night after that. Their romance unfolded in secret places, picnics in obscure corners of Centennial Park, dinners in restaurants far from Nashville's social circuit, weekends in cabins where no one would recognize the Thornton Industries heir with a bartender from South Side. "My family wouldn't understand," he'd explained, tracing patterns on her bare shoulder one night. "They're traditional." Avery understood his careful phrasing. Traditional meant they wouldn't approve of their son dating a black woman from the wrong side of town, especially one without the pedigree they surely expected. She'd accepted the secrecy because what they shared in those hidden moments felt real enough to justify the compromise. Now, staring at the test, reality crashed through her romantic illusions. With shaking fingers, Avery dialed his private number, the one few people had. Michael answered on the third ring. "Avery?" His voice carried the background noise of an office. "I'm in a meeting. Can this wait?" "I need to see you," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "It's important." A pause. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted subtly. "My office. Tomorrow, 7 p.m. Use the service entrance." The line went dead before she could respond. The next evening, Avery stood before the imposing glass tower of Thornton Industries, rain soaking through her thin jacket. She dressed carefully, her nicest jeans, a blouse she'd splurged on for her birthday, low heels that pinched her toes but looked more professional than her usual sneakers. The security guard at the service entrance barely glanced at her ID before pointing toward a service elevator. "Mr. Thornton said to send you up." On the 32nd floor, Michael's assistant, a sleek blonde who assessed Avery with a single dismissive glance, led her to his office without a word. Michael stood with his back to the door, gazing out floor-to-ceiling windows at the Nashville skyline. The office was immaculate, all chrome, glass, and dark wood, with framed architectural photographs and not a single personal item in sight. "Michael?" Avery's voice sounded small in the cavernous space. He turned, and the coldness in his eyes made her step back involuntarily. This wasn't the man who'd whispered poetry against her skin just last weekend. This was someone else entirely, someone she'd never met. "Sit down, Avery." He gestured to a chair across from his desk, not moving to embrace her, not offering the smile that had warmed her for months. She remained standing. "I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air between them. Michael's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Calculation, not shock. I see. He walked to his desk, his movements deliberate. That's unfortunate timing. Unfortunate? The word felt like a slap. I'm being groomed for the vice presidency. The board votes next month. He straightened papers on his desk that didn't need straightening. And my parents have been negotiating with the Hendersons. Their daughter, Caroline, it's practically arranged. Avery felt the floor tilt beneath her. What are you saying? You're engaged? Not officially. Not yet. He finally looked at her directly. But it will happen. It has to happen. Our families have been planning this merger for years. Merger? Avery whispered. You're talking about marriage like a business deal. Michael's laugh was short, devoid of humor. What did you think this was about, Avery? My family has built something that spans generations. Did you genuinely believe I would throw that away? I thought we had something special, she said, tears forming despite her determination to remain composed. His laugh morphed into something cruel. Special? A bartender without a college degree, living in a decaying neighborhood? You were a diversion, Avery. Women like you are temporary entertainment, not wives for men like me. Each word struck with precision, dismantling every moment she'd treasured, every promise she'd believed. Michael opened a drawer and pushed a thick envelope across the polished desk. $10,000. Take care of it. I don't want to be connected to a mixed-race bastard. The casual cruelty of his words knocked the air from her lungs. I'm not aborting our child. His expression hardened. Then we'll handle this legally. He extracted another document from the drawer. Sign this paternity waiver. There won't be a penny beyond that envelope, and if you try to link me to this child, my lawyers will destroy you. How can you do this? Avery's voice broke. You told me you loved me. Michael smiled thinly. I say that to all of them. Did you really believe someone like me would build a future with someone like you? You'll never amount to anything, Avery. A mediocre bartender with no ambition, no class, no relevance. This check is more money than you'd see in years. Avery stared at the man before her, searching for any trace of the person who'd held her through nightmares, who'd listened to her hopes with apparent fascination, who'd promised that her dreams mattered. There was nothing familiar in his cold eyes. Sign it, he repeated, sliding a pen toward her. With trembling fingers, Avery picked up the document. She scanned terms that stripped her child of any connection to its father, of any claim to support or recognition. The legal language was dense, but the message was clear. Michael Thornton was erasing himself from their lives as thoroughly as if they'd never existed. She signed. The elevator ride down was a blur. Outside, the rain had intensified, matching the storm inside her. Avery clutched the envelope to her chest, its contents simultaneously a lifeline and a brand of shame. $10,000. The price Michael Thornton had placed on her dignity, on their child's existence. In the weeks that followed, Avery's carefully constructed life unraveled thread by thread. Her landlord posted notices about a rent increase. Her boss at Whiskey Blue, noticing the early signs of pregnancy, reduced her hours with a sympathetic but firm explanation. Customers don't like being served by pregnant women. Nothing personal, honey. Rachel, her only close friend and roommate, accepted a job offer in Chicago. I can't pass this up, Av. It's the opportunity of a lifetime. By her 5th month of pregnancy, Avery was sleeping on a cot at a women's shelter, the $10,000 depleted by medical bills, debts, and basic necessities. The lowest point came when, seeking employment at a cafe, the manager looked her up and down before dismissing her with, "Nobody wants a pregnant woman stumbling between tables." That night, sitting on a bench in Centennial Park with just $27.35 in her account, Avery placed a hand on her growing belly, feeling the baby kick against her palm. "It's just us now, little warrior," she whispered, "but I promise I'll turn this around. He's wrong about me. He's wrong about us." The turning point arrived unexpectedly. Seeking shelter from the summer heat in the public library, Avery was studying entrepreneurship books with desperate intensity when Eleanor Reynolds, a 72-year-old retired teacher, noticed her. "My dear, you seem to be in trouble," the elderly woman said, offering a sandwich from her lunchbox. Something about Eleanor's dignified kindness broke through Avery's carefully maintained facade. Tears spilled as she shared her story, the romance, the betrayal, the struggle to survive while preparing for a child she was determined to keep. Eleanor, a childless widow, listened without judgment. When Avery finished, the older woman simply said, "My husband used to say sometimes God allows us to be broken so we can be rebuilt stronger. Let's rebuild you, dear." With Eleanor's support, Avery secured an administrative position at a small tech startup. In her spare hours, she devoured free online courses on programming and digital marketing, determined to create a future where she would never again be at anyone's mercy. Isaiah was born on a spring afternoon in 2010 with intense eyes that painfully reminded Avery of Michael. Holding her son for the first time, she made a promise that would shape the next 15 years. "I'll build an empire for you, my son. One day your father will look at us and understand the monumental mistake he made." As she cradled Isaiah in the modest hospital room, Eleanor gently touching the newborn's cheek with wonder, Avery couldn't imagine that 15 years later she would be commanding a company valued at nearly $1 billion, and Michael Thornton would be nothing but a footnote in her success story. Avery's hand trembled as she clutched the envelope containing Michael's check. $10,000, the price he'd placed on erasing himself from their lives. Rain soaked through her thin jacket as she waited for the bus, each cold drop mirroring the tears she refused to shed. Not here. Not where strangers could witness her unraveling. The eviction notice had appeared on her door 3 days after her meeting with Michael. The landlord, a balding man with perpetually ink-stained fingers, had taped it crookedly to the peeling paint. "Rent's going up 15% next month," he'd explained with a shrug when she confronted him. "Market rates, sweetheart. Nothing personal." 15% might as well have been 50. Even before her hours were cut, Avery had been stretching each paycheck to its breaking point. The bus arrived with a hydraulic sigh. She climbed aboard, dropped her fare in the box, and found a seat near the back. Through the rain-streaked window, Nashville's lights blurred into watery halos. Her hand instinctively moved to her still flat stomach. A baby. Their baby. Michael's dismissive words echoed in her mind. "Mixed-race bastard." She swallowed the bile that rose in her throat. At the Whiskey Blue, Avery tied her apron with practiced efficiency, noting the thin Tuesday night crowd. Her manager, Dale, beckoned her to the back office before she could start her shift. "Have a seat, Avery," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. The cramped office smelled of stale cigarettes and cheap cologne. Dale fidgeted with a pencil, rolling it between his fingers. "I've noticed you've been different lately," he began. "And some of the customers have commented." "Commented on what?" Avery asked, though she already knew. Dale's eyes flicked briefly to her midsection. "Look, I'm not judging your personal choices, but customers don't like being served by pregnant women. Makes them uncomfortable. Nothing personal, honey." "I'm not showing yet," Avery protested, heat rising to her face. "And I've never missed a shift. My tips are consistently higher than—" "I'm cutting you back to 3 shifts a week," Dale interrupted. "Weekday afternoons only. We'll reassess in a month. 3 shifts, less than half her usual hours, less than half her usual income." "Dale, please, I can't—" "That's all, Avery. Karen's waiting tables tonight." She walked out into the main bar area where Karen, a college sophomore with a perpetual tan and highlighted blonde hair, was already chatting up the regulars. The girl caught Avery's eye and offered a small, embarrassed smile. The bus ride home was longer, the vehicle nearly empty at this hour. Avery pulled out her phone and called Rachel, who answered on the 4th ring. "Hey, what's up? I'm kind of in the middle of something." Rachel's voice was hushed, background noise suggesting a restaurant. They cut my hours, Avery said, dispensing with pleasantries. Dale says customers don't want a pregnant waitress. A pause. Shit, Av. That's awful. Have you told Michael yet? There's nothing to tell. He made his position clear. Another pause. Look, I've been meaning to talk to you about something. Remember that graphic design internship I applied for in Chicago? Avery's stomach tightened. You got it? It's a real job, Av. Full benefits. Actual career path. I start in 3 weeks. The implications washed over Avery in a cold wave. Without Rachel's share of the rent, the apartment was completely unaffordable. Even if she found another roommate immediately, which was unlikely given her pregnancy, she'd need to come up with Rachel's security deposit portion to return to her. That's great, Rachel. Really. Avery forced enthusiasm into her voice. You've wanted this for so long. I can't pass this up, Av. It's the opportunity of a lifetime. Of course not. I'm happy for you. The lie tasted bitter, but what was the alternative? Ask her friend to sacrifice her future for a pregnant woman with dwindling prospects? That wasn't who Avery was. That wasn't who she would allow herself to become. The weeks that followed blurred together in a montage of rejections. 6 apartment applications denied, landlords suddenly remembering previous commitments when they noticed her condition. 4 job interviews where eyes drifted to her increasingly visible pregnancy, followed by carefully worded rejections. By her 5th month, the curve of her belly was undeniable. The $10,000, which had seemed like a fortune that night in Michael's office, disappeared with terrifying speed. First went the advance rent for a smaller apartment after Rachel left. Then came the medical bills, insurance deductibles, prenatal vitamins, and maternity clothes for her changing body. When the 2nd month's rent came due and her account showed just over $500, Avery made the hardest call of her life. Women's Emergency Shelter, this is Monica speaking. The shelter had a 6-week waiting list for residents but offered emergency overnight accommodations. Just until you get back on your feet, the intake counselor assured her as she signed the paperwork, eyes lingering sympathetically on Avery's swollen belly. Her first night there, Avery lay on a narrow cot, one arm curled protectively around her stomach, listening to the sounds of other women's quiet sobs and whispered phone conversations. The room held 4 women, separated only by thin curtains on metal tracks. The bathroom was down the hall, shared by 16 residents. Morning brought a renewed determination. Avery dressed in her most professional outfit, a black maternity skirt and white blouse she'd purchased secondhand, and set out to find work. Any work. The manager at Riverside Cafe looked her up and down, his expression shifting from interest to dismissal in the span of seconds. You've got good experience, he admitted, glancing at her application. But we need someone who can move quickly between tables, and frankly, nobody wants a pregnant woman stumbling around carrying hot coffee. I'm not stumbling, Avery said, struggling to keep her voice level. I've never been more careful in my life. The manager shrugged. Come back after the baby. Maybe we'll have something then. 7 interviews, 7 rejections, each more demoralizing than the last. That evening, with $27.35 remaining in her account, Avery sat on a bench in Centennial Park. The late summer sun cast long shadows across the grass where couples picnicked and children played. A memory surfaced. Michael spreading a blanket in this very park, producing a bottle of wine and strawberries from a wicker basket, his eyes crinkling at the corners when he smiled. The baby kicked, a flutter beneath her palm. It's just us now, little warrior, she whispered. But I promise I'll turn this around. He's wrong about me. He's wrong about us. The public library became Avery's sanctuary in the weeks that followed. Air-conditioned in the sweltering August heat, clean bathrooms, comfortable chairs, and most importantly, free. She divided her days between job searches and devouring books on business, entrepreneurship, and computer programming. Basic HTML and CSS, JavaScript for beginners, women in tech, breaking barriers. She absorbed each one with desperate intensity, taking notes in a composition book until her hand cramped. On a particularly hot Tuesday, Avery had claimed her usual corner table, surrounded by books and nursing a water bottle she'd refilled 3 times already. So focused was she on the screen of the public computer that she didn't notice the elderly woman watching her until a sandwich appeared at her elbow. "My dear, you seem to be in trouble," said a soft voice with the gentle lilt of the Deep South. Avery looked up to find an elegant black woman in her 70s, silver hair swept into a neat bun, intelligent eyes assessing her from behind tortoiseshell glasses. "I'm fine, thank you," Avery replied automatically, though her stomach growled traitorously at the sight of the sandwich. "I'm Eleanor Reynolds," the woman continued, undeterred. "Retired English teacher, 37 years at East Nashville High." She nodded toward the sandwich. "Egg salad, my late husband's recipe. Please, you're eating for 2. Something about the woman's dignified kindness, her lack of pity despite the obvious assessment of Avery's situation, broke through carefully maintained defenses. Avery's eyes filled with tears she'd refused to shed for months. "I'm sorry," she whispered, hastily wiping her cheeks. "I don't know why I'm—" "You're exhausted, undernourished, and carrying the weight of the world along with that baby," Eleanor stated matter-of-factly. "No apologies necessary." Over that sandwich, shared on a library bench, Avery found herself telling this stranger everything. The romance with Michael, his cruel rejection, her current homelessness, the desperate scramble to create a future for her child. Eleanor listened without interruption, her expression shifting between compassion and indignation. When Avery finished, the older woman simply said, "My husband used to say sometimes God allows us to be broken so we can be rebuilt stronger. Let's rebuild you, dear." The offer came simply. The spare bedroom in Eleanor's modest bungalow in East Nashville. "Just until you find your footing," Eleanor insisted. "My house is too quiet these days." Avery's pride warred with her practicality. Her child deserved better than a shelter cot. "I can contribute something," she insisted. "For utilities, food." "We'll work out the details later," Eleanor said with a dismissive wave. "For now, let's get you settled." Eleanor's home was like the woman herself, modest but dignified, meticulously clean, filled with books and memories. The spare bedroom had once belonged to Eleanor's husband's mother. Faded floral wallpaper, a patchwork quilt on a cherrywood bed, curtains that smelled faintly of lavender. "It's not much," Eleanor said, watching Avery take in the room. "It's perfect," Avery whispered, running her fingers over the quilt. With a stable address and Eleanor's guidance, Avery secured an administrative position at Technova, a small software development startup. The pay was modest, but the company offered flexible hours and the promise of growth. "We need someone organized who can learn quickly," the HR manager explained. "The pregnancy isn't an issue as long as you can manage the basic admin tasks." In the evenings, Eleanor helped Avery create a financial plan, meticulously tracking every dollar, building a strategy for the future. "First rule of rebuilding," Eleanor would say, "is to understand exactly what resources you have." The nights found Avery hunched over Eleanor's ancient desktop computer, devouring free online courses on programming, design, and digital marketing. Sometimes she worked until her eyes burned, until Eleanor gently reminded her that the baby needed rest too. When Isaiah was born on a bright spring afternoon in 2010, Avery gazed into eyes that mirrored Michael's with painful accuracy. But instead of resentment, she felt a fierce, protective love unlike anything she'd experienced. "I'll build an empire for you, my son," she whispered as the newborn's tiny fingers wrapped around her thumb. "One day, your father will look at us and understand the monumental mistake he made." Eleanor, standing beside the hospital bed, gently touched the baby's soft cheek. "Isaiah Reynolds," she murmured, "a prophet's name, a name of vision and strength." As she cradled her son in the modest hospital room, watching Eleanor fuss over the swaddling blanket with grandmotherly pride, Avery didn't know that the elderly woman's name, freely offered as a gift to a child who would never know his father's, would one day grace the logo of a technology empire worth hundreds of millions. An empire built by the mediocre bartender without ambition, who would reinvent herself as one of the most visionary CEOs of her generation. Eleanor's home became a sanctuary where Avery could finally breathe. That first night, lying in the soft bed beneath the patchwork quilt, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months: safety. The feeling was so overwhelming that she wept silently, one hand resting on her rounded belly, whispering promises to her unborn child. The following morning, Avery woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Eleanor humming in the kitchen. For a moment, disoriented by comfort, she forgot where she was. Then reality settled in, not with its usual sting, but with an unexpected warmth. "Good morning, dear," Eleanor said, sliding a plate of eggs and toast across the table. "I've made a list of companies hiring administrative staff. Technova caught my eye. They're a small startup, but they offer health benefits from day one." Avery stared at the neatly written list. "You didn't have to." "Nonsense," Eleanor interrupted gently. "My Harold always said idle hands make for a troubled mind. Besides, I taught high school English for 37 years. Research is my specialty." 2 days later, Avery sat in Technova's modest waiting room, smoothing non-existent wrinkles from her borrowed maternity dress. Eleanor had altered one of her church dresses, taking it in where needed and letting out the waist. It wasn't stylish, but it was dignified, exactly what Avery needed to project confidence despite the anxiety churning in her stomach. The HR manager, a woman in her early 30s with a geometric haircut and bright red glasses, glanced between Avery's resume and her visible pregnancy with surprising neutrality. "Your administrative experience is limited," she noted. "Yes," Avery admitted, "but I'm a quick learner. I've been teaching myself Excel and basic accounting in my spare time." The woman, Jessica, according to the nameplate on her desk, raised an eyebrow. "Most people watch Netflix in their spare time." "I don't have that luxury," Avery replied simply. Something in her tone must have resonated with Jessica, whose expression softened marginally. "We need someone organized who can learn quickly. The pregnancy isn't an issue as long as you can manage the basic admin tasks. When are you due?" 3 months. "And after?" "I'll need 6 weeks, but I can do some work remotely during that time." Jessica nodded, making a note. "Most candidates ask about advancement opportunities or ping-pong tables. You're the first to jump straight to accommodating our needs during your maternity leave." Avery met her eyes steadily. "I understand what it means to be valuable to an employer. I won't take that for granted." The job offer came 2 days later. Modest salary, full benefits, flexible hours. Eleanor celebrated by baking a cake, an old family recipe that filled the house with the scent of vanilla and comfort. "The first step," she declared, cutting generous slices. "Now we build." Evenings took on a new rhythm. After dinner, Eleanor would settle in her recliner with a novel while Avery hunched over the ancient desktop computer in the corner of the living room, devouring free online courses on programming, design, and digital marketing. She worked until her eyes burned, until her back ached from the weight of pregnancy and poor posture. "The baby needs rest too," Eleanor would eventually say, placing a gentle hand on Avery's shoulder. "Rome wasn't built in a night, dear." At Technova, Avery absorbed everything. She organized files, scheduled meetings, ordered supplies, but she also listened. She observed how the programmers talked, noted the problems they encountered, recognized patterns in the solutions they developed. During lunch breaks, she asked questions that earned her first curious glances, then thoughtful explanations. As her pregnancy progressed, she created systems that would allow her work to continue smoothly during her absence. Detailed procedure documents, training materials for her temporary replacement, automated processes where possible. Her meticulous preparation impressed Jessica enough to offer a small raise before Avery had even gone on leave. "You've turned out to be quite an asset," Jessica admitted. "We'll hold your position." In the quiet hours of night, Eleanor taught Avery about financial planning, budgeting every dollar, prioritizing expenses, building savings even from the smallest amounts. "First rule of rebuilding," Eleanor would say, her glasses perched on the end of her nose as she reviewed Avery's careful columns of numbers, "is to understand exactly what resources you have." When contractions began 3 weeks before her due date, Avery was updating a database of client contacts. Eleanor drove her to the hospital, calm and steady, while Avery alternated between panic and determination. "You're stronger than you know," Eleanor reassured her as they waited for the doctor. "Women have been doing this since the beginning of time." "Not alone," Avery whispered, a moment of vulnerability breaking through her carefully constructed resolve. Eleanor took her hand firmly. "You are not alone." The labor lasted 16 hours. Through each contraction, each moment of searing pain, Avery held onto a single thought. This child would never know abandonment. This child would know only strength and love and possibility. When Isaiah finally arrived, red-faced and squalling with impressive volume, the attending nurse placed him immediately on Avery's chest. She looked down into eyes that mirrored Michael's with painful accuracy. The same shape, the same intense gaze. For a heartbeat, she feared resentment would overwhelm her. Instead, a fierce, protective love surged through her body with such force that it momentarily took her breath away. This wasn't Michael's child. This was her son. Hers alone. "I'll build an empire for you, my son," she whispered, as the newborn's tiny fingers wrapped around her thumb with surprising strength. "One day, your father will look at us and understand the monumental mistake he made." Eleanor, standing beside the hospital bed, gently touched the baby's soft cheek. "Isaiah Reynolds," she murmured. "A prophet's name, a name of vision and strength." Avery looked up sharply. "Reynolds? Unless you prefer Williams," Eleanor said, suddenly uncertain. "I just thought—" "No," Avery interrupted, tears filling her eyes. "Reynolds is perfect. Isaiah Reynolds." The early months passed in a blur of exhaustion and discovery. Isaiah proved to be an alert, observant baby who studied the world with uncommon intensity. He slept little but cried rarely, seeming to prefer quiet observation to fussing. True to her word, Avery began working remotely after 3 weeks, balancing her laptop on the arm of the sofa while Isaiah nursed or napped against her chest. She returned to the office part-time at 6 weeks, bringing Isaiah with her 3 days a week after Jessica, impressed by Avery's dedication, suggested a portable crib in the corner of the administrative area. "He's the quietest baby I've ever seen," Jessica commented, watching Isaiah contentedly stacking wooden blocks while Avery organized the quarterly expense reports. "Most of the team doesn't even realize he's here." "He's observing," Avery said with a smile. "Learning how everything works." At night, after Isaiah finally succumbed to sleep, Avery would return to her studies with renewed determination. The computer screen illuminated her face as she absorbed lessons on JavaScript, PHP, user interface design, building skills one tutorial at a time, 1 hour of precious sleep sacrificed after another. Eleanor often found her asleep at the desk, head pillowed on her arms beside the keyboard. Gently, she would wake her just enough to guide her to bed, murmuring, "The baby needs his mother rested. The world will still be there to conquer tomorrow." By the time Isaiah turned 1, he was already showing signs of the extraordinary intelligence that would later define him. He spoke in complete sentences months before expected, built complex structures with his blocks, and showed an uncanny ability to understand patterns. "Remarkable," Eleanor would say, watching him solve simple puzzles meant for much older children. "Absolutely remarkable." When Isaiah turned 2, Avery was promoted to executive assistant to Technova's CEO. The substantial raise allowed her to contribute more to the household expenses and start a modest savings account for Isaiah's future education. Eleanor, despite Avery's protests, refused to accept more than a token amount for rent. "This house is paid for," she insisted. "Harold made sure of that before he passed. Save your money for that boy's future. He's going to need a proper college fund." Together they created a home filled with books, music, and conversation. Eleanor read to Isaiah for hours, introducing him to literature far beyond typical toddler fare. By age 3, he was correcting her when she deliberately skipped pages in his favorite stories. "You missed the part about the quantum particles, Grandma Ellie," he would say with the serious expression that made him look so much like his absent father. Eleanor, delighted by his precocity, began teaching him rudimentary mathematics and science concepts. Avery, watching them huddle over simple experiments at the kitchen table, felt a pang of both gratitude and sadness. This was what family should be, this support, this nurturing of potential. What might Isaiah have become with 2 parents who cherished him? What might she have accomplished with someone believing in her from the beginning? Then she would remember Michael's cruel dismissal. "You'll never amount to anything, Avery," and her resolve would harden. She would prove him wrong in every possible way. On Isaiah's 3rd birthday, they celebrated with a small chocolate cake Eleanor baked from scratch. The candles illuminated Isaiah's serious face as he considered his wish with characteristic thoughtfulness before blowing them out with determined precision. "What did you wish for, sweet boy?" Eleanor asked, cutting perfect triangular slices. "Can't tell," Isaiah replied solemnly. "Otherwise it won't come true. That's the established protocol for birthday wishes." Avery laughed, a sound that had become more frequent as the years passed and the raw wound of Michael's rejection gradually scarred over. "Established protocol, huh? Where did you learn that phrase?" "Documentary," Isaiah answered, carefully licking frosting from his fork. "About scientific method." That night, after tucking Isaiah into bed with 3 stories and his customary 5 questions about how the world worked, Avery sat at Eleanor's kitchen table with her laptop, creating her first website. It was a simple project, a digital portfolio showcasing administrative skills, but with a section highlighting her self-taught programming abilities. "Building your escape route?" Eleanor asked, settling across from her with a cup of chamomile tea. "Building options," Avery corrected. "Technova is struggling. Their last 2 products underperformed. I need to be prepared." Eleanor studied her with quiet pride. "You're not that frightened girl from the library anymore." "Because of you," Avery said, reaching across to squeeze the older woman's hand. "No, dear, because of you. I just provided a safe harbor. You built the ship." 3 days later, Isaiah asked the question Avery had been preparing for since his birth. "Mommy, where is my daddy?" They were walking home from the park, Isaiah's small hand wrapped trustingly in hers. The question came without preamble, typical of his direct approach to gathering information. Avery had rehearsed this moment countless times in her mind, determined to be honest without burdening her son with the full cruelty of his father's rejection. "Your father chose not to be part of our lives," she said carefully, kneeling to meet his eyes, Michael's eyes, directly. "That was his decision, and it had nothing to do with you." "Did he not want a baby?" Isaiah asked, his expression thoughtful rather than hurt. "He didn't want the responsibility of a family," Avery answered, striving for neutrality. "Some people aren't ready for that." Isaiah considered this with his characteristic thoroughness. "But his decision made us stronger," he concluded with startling insight. "Like in my book about trees that grow better after a forest fire." Avery blinked back sudden tears, amazed once again by the extraordinary mind developing before her eyes. "Yes," she agreed softly, "exactly like that." Observing her son sleep that night, his dark lashes resting against brown cheeks, mouth slightly open in childish abandonment, Avery marveled at the perfect complexity of him. She could not regret a single moment of her difficult journey, for it had led to this miracle of a child who already showed such promise. Brushing a curl from his forehead, she whispered, "Sleep well, my brilliant boy." Observing her son's sleep, Avery couldn't know that the small brain resting peacefully already harbored the genius that, a decade later, would create revolutionary algorithms that would transform the technology industry and force Michael Thornton to face the consequences of his abandonment. The morning of Eleanor's funeral dawned with a gray drizzle that seemed fitting for the occasion. Avery stood beneath a black umbrella, Isaiah's small hand gripped tightly in hers, as they watched the simple casket being lowered into the earth. At 5 years old, Isaiah understood death with an unsettling clarity. Grandma Ellie's body stopped working, he had explained to the neighbor's daughter the day before. Her consciousness has ceased, but the impact of her existence continues through her influence on others. Now, as the minister spoke words about eternal rest and heavenly reward, Isaiah remained solemn and dry-eyed. Avery envied his composure. Her own grief threatened to overwhelm her at every moment, not just for the woman who had saved her from destitution, but for the only true mother figure she had ever known. Back at Eleanor's house, their house now, according to the will that Eleanor had updated years ago, Avery found herself standing in the kitchen, staring blankly at the familiar yellow walls as distant relatives and church friends murmured condolences over casserole dishes. "Ms. Williams?" A balding man in an ill-fitting suit approached, clutching a leather portfolio. "I'm Martin Greaves, Eleanor's attorney. When you have a moment, there are some matters we should discuss." An hour later, after the last sympathetic neighbor had departed, Avery sat at the kitchen table while Isaiah quietly arranged and rearranged his collection of minerals in the living room. "Eleanor was quite specific," Martin explained, sliding a sealed envelope across the table. "This letter is to be read by you alone. The house, of course, transfers to you and Isaiah as per her will. There's a small life insurance policy as well. Nothing extravagant, but enough to provide some cushion." After the attorney left, Avery opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Eleanor's elegant handwriting filled the page. "My dearest Avery, if you're reading this, I've gone to join my Harold. Please don't waste tears on me. I've lived a full life and found unexpected joy in the family you and Isaiah became to me. The house is yours now, as you know. But I want you to consider something carefully. It represents possibility. When Harold and I purchased it 50 years ago, we saw not just shelter, but the foundation for our dreams. Use what I've left you to build something that lasts, something that makes a difference. You've spoken of your ideas, your vision for technology that serves those often forgotten. Perhaps the value of this house can be the seed for that vision. Isaiah is extraordinary, as you well know. His mind will need challenges worthy of its capacity. Create something not just for yourself, but for him. A legacy that shows him what determination and intelligence can accomplish when paired with compassion. Remember, dear girl, you were never the woman that man said you were. You were always so much more. With all my love, Eleanor." Avery pressed the letter to her chest, tears flowing freely now. For 5 years, Eleanor had been her foundation, her sounding board, her unwavering supporter. The thought of moving forward without her wisdom felt impossible. "Mom?" Isaiah stood in the doorway, clutching his favorite geode. "Are we going to leave Grandma Ellie's house now?" "No, sweetie," Avery said, quickly wiping her tears. "This is our house now, but we might need to make some changes." "What kind of changes?" His eyes, so like Michael's, studied her with that penetrating gaze that seemed to see straight through to her thoughts. "Big ones," she answered, making a decision that would alter their future irrevocably. The kind that build futures. 3 weeks later, a for sale sign stood in the front yard of Eleanor's beloved bungalow. Inside, Avery and Isaiah methodically packed decades of memories into cardboard boxes, sorting what to keep, what to donate, what to sell. "Where will we go?" Isaiah asked, carefully wrapping Eleanor's cherished first-edition Faulkner novels in tissue paper. "I found an apartment near downtown," Avery explained. "It's small, but it's close to the technology corridor, and there's a magnet school nearby with an advanced program that would be perfect for you." She didn't mention that the apartment cost nearly twice what their current mortgage would have been, or that the magnet school had a waiting list 2 years long. Those were problems to solve later. The house sold in 11 days, well above asking price to a young couple expecting their first child. As Avery signed the closing documents, she felt a strange mixture of grief and exhilaration. This money, more than she had ever had at one time, represented not just Eleanor's final gift, but the seed capital for the vision she had nurtured during late nights of online courses and daydreams between administrative tasks. Their new apartment was indeed small. 2 bedrooms with industrial-style exposed brick and pipes that the realtor had described as urban chic, but which really just meant the building had been hastily converted from an old factory. What it lacked in charm, however, it made up for in location and practicality. Within a week, the 2nd bedroom had been transformed into a home office, with desks for both Avery and Isaiah, multiple computer monitors, and bookshelves filled with technical manuals and educational materials. It looked more like a startup workspace than a room in a family home, which was precisely the point. On a crisp autumn morning, Avery filed the paperwork to register her first company, Reynolds Tech, in honor of the woman who had believed in her when no one else would. The LLC registration fee consumed a significant portion of her remaining savings after the apartment's security deposit and first month's rent, but seeing the official certificate with her company name filled her with vindication. "You'll never amount to anything, Avery." Michael's dismissive words had haunted her for 5 years. Now she had the foundation to prove him wrong. The early days of Reynolds Tech were a precarious balance between hope and panic. By day, Avery continued her role at Technova, having advanced to executive assistant to the CEO. By night, she developed prototypes for accessible technology interfaces, taught herself programming languages, and drafted business plans that she rewrote dozens of times. Isaiah, now in kindergarten but already reading at a 4th grade level, often fell asleep to the sound of his mother's fingers tapping on keyboard keys. Sometimes he would wake in the early morning hours to find her asleep at her desk, her face illuminated by the blue glow of the monitor. On those mornings, he would carefully drape a blanket over her shoulders before returning to bed. "Mommy is building our future," she explained one morning when he found her reviewing spreadsheets with dark circles under her eyes. "I could help," he offered seriously. "I'm good at patterns." Avery smiled, running a hand over his curls. "You help by being exactly who you are, my brilliant boy." As months passed, the precarious balance became increasingly difficult to maintain. Technova was struggling. Their latest software release had critical bugs, and a larger competitor was aggressively moving into their market space. Layoffs began, first in marketing, then in administrative support. Avery observed the company's decline with analytical detachment, mentally noting the missteps and poor decisions that accelerated the downward spiral. Each mistake became a lesson for her own venture: what not to do, which warning signs to heed, how communication breakdowns could sink even promising products. At night, she would review her dwindling savings against mounting expenses: the apartment, Isaiah's educational materials, development costs for her prototypes. All consumed resources faster than she had anticipated. She began taking freelance web development projects on weekends, sacrificing sleep to maintain their standard of living while pursuing her entrepreneurial dreams. Isaiah, now 6, displayed increasingly remarkable abilities. He had taught himself basic coding principles by watching tutorial videos meant for adults. His mathematical intuition bordered on savant level, allowing him to solve complex problems through intuitive methods he sometimes struggled to explain. "He's performing at a middle school level in most subjects," his first-grade teacher explained during a conference, looking both impressed and slightly overwhelmed. "We're not equipped to challenge him adequately." The magnet school waiting list remained impenetrable, and private schools that might accommodate his gifts were financially out of reach. Avery began homeschooling him on evenings and weekends, supplementing his regular education with advanced materials she could barely afford. The turning point, both crisis and opportunity, arrived unexpectedly on a Wednesday afternoon at Technova. Avery was organizing documents for what everyone knew would likely be the final investor meeting before bankruptcy proceedings when she noticed David Chen, one of the few remaining developers, cursing quietly at his workstation. David, blind since birth, was struggling with his screen reader software, which kept crashing when attempting to parse the complex debugging environment. "This damn thing is useless for actual development work," he muttered when Avery inquired. "It's designed for basic browsing and document reading, not navigating complex interfaces with nested elements and dynamic content." Avery pulled a chair beside him, intrigued. What would make it better? David launched into a technical explanation of the limitations of current assistive technologies, particularly for power users and developers. "The market's too small for big companies to care," he concluded bitterly. "Blind developers are a niche within a niche." That evening, Avery recounted the conversation to Isaiah as they worked side by side at their desks. To her surprise, her son spun his chair toward his own computer and opened a sound editing program he'd been experimenting with. "What if the computer could speak in different tones depending on the code structure?" he suggested, manipulating audio files to demonstrate. "Like music notes for different elements?" The simplicity and brilliance of the concept stopped Avery mid-sentence. For the next 3 hours, she watched in amazement as her 6-year-old son created a rudimentary audio interface that assigned distinct tones to different HTML elements, allowing a user to hear the structure of a web page. It was primitive, buggy, and limited, but it was also unlike anything on the market. That night, after Isaiah had finally gone to bed, Avery stared at the ceiling, mind racing. The interface prototype, while crude, represented a genuinely innovative approach to accessibility. If developed properly, it could serve not just visually impaired users, but potentially create new ways for anyone to interact with digital environments. 2 weeks later, Technova announced its closure. With her severance package providing a temporary buffer, Avery made the leap to full-time entrepreneurship. She refined Isaiah's concept into a more sophisticated prototype, combining his audio interface ideas with her own visual enhancement tools for users with partial sight. The first investor meeting was a humiliating disaster. "This isn't a serious business proposition," said the bored-looking venture capitalist, barely glancing at the prototype demonstration. "It's a hobby project at best." "The accessible technology market is too limited," said another. "Come back when you have an actual team, not a single-parent operation," advised a third. By the 11th rejection, Avery had refined her pitch, improved the prototype, and developed thicker skin. But resources were dwindling dangerously. The apartment's rent consumed most of her remaining severance, and freelance projects weren't generating sufficient income to sustain both living expenses and development costs. The 13th rejection hit hardest. The investor, a technology veteran who had seemed genuinely interested during the initial presentation, delivered his decision with clinical precision. "This isn't brainchild material. Come back when you have something serious." In the public bathroom of the downtown office building, Avery allowed herself 5 minutes of silent tears, locked in a stall where Isaiah couldn't see her desperation. Then she washed her face, reapplied her lipstick, and walked out with shoulders squared, determined not to let her 8-year-old son witness her doubt. The 14th meeting wasn't supposed to be an investment pitch at all. Avery had secured 15 minutes with Sophia Zhang, a former Google executive, hoping merely for mentorship advice. She brought Isaiah along because her regular sitter was unavailable, a breach of professional protocol that she apologized for immediately. Sophia, however, waved away the apology and invited Isaiah to demonstrate the prototype himself. For the next 20 minutes, the 8-year-old confidently explained the technical aspects of their accessibility interface with clarity that belied his age. Most of the core algorithms were Isaiah's concept, Avery explained, watching Sophia's expression shift from polite interest to genuine intrigue. I've refined and implemented them, but the fundamental approach was his innovation. Sophia studied them both with penetrating intensity. Most of these pitches I see are from Stanford MBAs with trust funds and safety nets. They're building another food delivery app or social media platform because they want to be billionaires. She leaned forward, eyes moving between mother and son. You two have hunger in your eyes, and that's worth more than any MBA. 2 weeks later, Sophia Zhang deposited $150,000 into the newly created Reynolds Tech corporate account, becoming their first angel investor in exchange for a 15% equity stake. When Sophia Zhang deposited the $150,000 into her account that had been nearly empty, Avery couldn't imagine that this would be merely the first step of a journey that would lead her to command a company valued at $780 million and to an inevitable confrontation with the man who had discarded her as irrelevant. Sophia Zhang's investment transformed Reynolds Tech overnight from a desperate dream into a tangible reality. The morning after the funds cleared, Avery stood in the empty office space she'd leased in a weathered brick building on the outskirts of Nashville's emerging tech district. Sunlight streamed through dusty windows, illuminating the 3 second-hand desks she'd purchased from a business liquidation sale. "This is it?" Isaiah asked, his small fingers trailing along the scarred surface of what would become his mother's desk. "This is the beginning," Avery corrected, squeezing his shoulder. "Every empire starts somewhere." Within a week, the space had transformed. Internet cables snaked across the floor, connecting refurbished computers. Whiteboards covered one wall, filled with flowcharts and code snippets. The other walls remained bare except for a single framed item: the napkin where Avery had sketched her first interface design with Isaiah's childish handwriting adding notes in the margins. Their first hire was David Chen, the blind developer from Technova who had unwittingly inspired their venture. When Avery called to offer him the position, his laugh echoed through the phone. "You want me to leave a stable job at Microsoft for a startup with no track record, run by my former admin assistant? I want you to help build something that will change how people with disabilities interact with technology," Avery replied, "and I'll give you 5% equity." 2 days later, David joined their tiny team. Their second hire came through Sophia's network, a UX designer named Mia Kim who had grown frustrated with how larger companies treated accessibility as an afterthought. "I'm not looking for stability," Mia explained during her interview. "I'm looking for purpose." The early days established a pattern that would define Reynolds Tech's culture: long hours, passionate debates, and an unwavering focus on creating technology that served those often overlooked by Silicon Valley's giants. Isaiah, now 8, became a fixture in the office after school, sitting quietly among adults 2 or 3 times his age, absorbing concepts and occasionally offering insights that left even David speechless. "That kid doesn't think like a child," David remarked to Avery one evening after Isaiah had suggested an elegant solution to a coding problem that had stumped the team for days. "He sees patterns we don't." "He's always been that way," Avery replied, watching her son hunched over a keyboard, his small fingers flying across the keys with surprising dexterity, as if his brain is wired differently. 6 months after Sophia's investment, they had their first working prototype, a comprehensive screen reader that transformed digital content into an acoustic landscape, allowing blind users to hear the structure of websites and applications through subtle variations in tone and tempo. What made it revolutionary was its adaptability. Unlike existing solutions, it learned from user behavior, becoming more personalized over time. The first public demonstration happened at a small accessibility conference in Atlanta. Avery had spent their limited marketing budget securing a tiny booth in the exhibition hall, far from the major companies with their elaborate displays and branded giveaways. Their breakthrough came when Marcus Jameson, a well-known blogger who had been blind since childhood, stopped by their booth, skeptical but willing to try yet another assistive technology promising innovation. "I've heard these claims before," he said, fingers skimming the keyboard they'd set up. Every company thinks they've solved the problem. 20 minutes later, Marcus was still at their booth, exploring increasingly complex websites with growing excitement. "This is different," he finally admitted, removing the headphones. "The spatial awareness I get from the audio cues, it's like I can see the structure in my mind." By that evening, Marcus had published a glowing review on his influential blog. 3 days later, Sophia called. "You've caused quite a stir," she said without preamble. "I'm organizing a dinner next week with some potential investors. Wear something nice." The dinner was at an upscale Nashville restaurant where Avery had once applied for a waitressing position and been rejected. Now she sat at a table with 5 venture capitalists, acutely aware of her discount department store dress amid their casual displays of wealth. Isaiah had remained home with a sitter. This was not a setting where his presence would be an asset. "The accessibility market is niche," said a silver-haired investor, swirling his bourbon. "What's your strategy for scaling beyond specialized applications?" Avery had anticipated this question. "Our adaptive technology has applications far beyond accessibility," she explained. "The same algorithms that allow a blind user to navigate complex interfaces could help anyone process digital information more efficiently. We're not just building for people with disabilities, we're reimagining how humans and computers interact." The dinner ended without commitments, but 3 weeks later, Sophia called again. "They're in. 2 million, Series A. Get ready for due diligence." The first significant investment round changed everything. Reynolds Tech moved to larger offices. The team expanded to 12 people. Avery hired an operations manager, a marketing director, and additional developers. For the first time, she drew a regular salary that allowed her to move Isaiah from their small apartment to a modest house in a neighborhood with better schools. Yet despite these external changes, some habits remained. Avery still worked until midnight most days. She still scoured industry news for emerging technologies and potential competitors, and occasionally, when she thought no one was watching, she would search for news about Thornton Industries and its executive vice president, Michael Thornton. The articles she found painted a picture of stagnation. The once formidable automotive components manufacturer was losing market share to more innovative Asian competitors. One business journal described the company as rooted in traditional manufacturing while the industry races toward an electric future. A photo accompanying the article showed Michael at a press conference, his face tense as he defended the company's conservative approach to shareholders. Avery felt no satisfaction from these glimpses into Michael's apparently troubled business life. She had long ago stopped defining her success in relation to his failure. Isaiah was her motivation now, creating a legacy worthy of his brilliant mind, a company that reflected values opposite to those Michael had demonstrated. When Isaiah turned 10, Reynolds Tech released its first commercial product, an adaptive interface that could be integrated into existing applications, making them instantly more accessible. Tech blogs praised its innovative approach. More importantly, users embraced it enthusiastically. "This changes everything," wrote one reviewer who had cerebral palsy. "For the first time, I don't have to fight with my computer to make it understand me." The product's success attracted larger investors. Reynolds Tech grew to 30 employees, then 50. Avery, once dismissed as a mediocre bartender without ambition, now led monthly strategy meetings and negotiated partnerships with established technology companies. The true inflection point came when Isaiah was 12. For weeks he had been working on a project he kept largely to himself, emerging from his room at odd hours to ask Avery increasingly complex questions about neural networks and machine learning, subjects she herself was still mastering. One night, well past midnight, Isaiah burst into Avery's home office, still in his pajamas, his eyes bright with excitement. "Mom, I solved the algorithm adaptivity problem," he exclaimed, thrusting a notebook filled with equations and diagrams into her hands. Avery studied the pages, initially struggling to follow his reasoning, then feeling her heart race as she grasped the implications. Isaiah hadn't just refined their existing approach, he'd reconceptualized it entirely, creating a framework where the interface could predict user needs based on contextual cues and behavioral patterns. "This is revolutionary," she whispered, looking up at her son with awe. "How did you even think of this?" Isaiah shrugged, suddenly self-conscious under her intense gaze. "I just saw the pattern. It was there all along." The next morning, Avery called an emergency meeting with her senior development team. By afternoon, they had shifted resources to implement Isaiah's algorithm. 6 months later, it became the core technology that differentiated Reynolds Tech from every competitor in the market. As Reynolds Tech's profile rose, so did media interest in its founder. Avery carefully managed her public image, focusing interviews on the technology and its impact rather than her personal journey. When pressed about her background, she offered a carefully crafted narrative. "I was a single mother who found opportunity in adversity." The move to Manhattan happened 3 years later when Reynolds Tech secured its Series C funding round. The company had outgrown Nashville's modest tech ecosystem, and New York offered proximity to major clients and a deeper talent pool. The transition marked another milestone, relocating to a 3-floor office space in Chelsea that housed 142 employees. The day they moved into the new headquarters, Avery stood in her corner office, gazing at the Manhattan skyline. Behind her desk hung a large framed magazine cover, Tech Forward's profile featuring her photograph under the headline, "The Phoenix of Technology: How Avery Reynolds Revolutionized Accessibility." A knock at her door interrupted her reflection. David Chen, now Chief Technology Officer, entered with a tablet in hand, his guide dog Pixel at his side. "The team's waiting in the conference room for your address," he said, "and congratulations on the profile, though they missed the best part of the story, which is that you built this not just as a business but as a statement about who deserves technology that works for them." He smiled. Also, Isaiah got the Harvard letter. Avery's heart skipped. Already? He's only 13. Apparently, their advanced placement program for exceptional students has been tracking his published papers on adaptive algorithms. The admissions director called personally. That evening, in their new apartment overlooking Central Park, a world away from the shelter cot she'd once slept on, Avery and Isaiah celebrated with takeout sushi and sparkling cider. "To Harvard at 15, Avery toasted, clinking her glass against his. "To Reynolds Tech," Isaiah countered. "And to you, Mom. You made all of this possible." As Isaiah slept that night, Avery sat on their terrace, the city lights glittering below. She thought about the journey, from that rain-soaked night in Michael's office to this moment of triumph. She had built something that mattered, something that helped people, something that would outlast her. Occasionally, during quiet moments like this, she still heard Michael's voice. "You'll never amount to anything, Avery." But now the words had lost their power. They were just echoes from a past that had no bearing on the future she was creating. While admiring the view from her new office in Manhattan, the city that once seemed so distant from her reality, Avery didn't know that Forbes was already preparing an article about the 40 most promising entrepreneurs under 40, and that this publication would eventually reach Michael Thornton's hands, forcing him to face the ghost he believed he had buried. The Forbes issue arrived at Reynolds Tech headquarters on a Tuesday morning, nestled among press releases and industry journals. Avery set it aside initially, prioritizing quarterly reports and partnership negotiations. It wasn't until evening, when the office had emptied and the Manhattan skyline glittered outside her window, that she finally opened the magazine to find her own face staring back at her from the 40 under 40 feature. The 2-page spread detailed her journey in carefully curated terms: the rise from administrative assistant to tech CEO, the focus on accessibility innovation, the meteoric growth of Reynolds Tech. The profile made no mention of Nashville, no hint of Michael Thornton, no reference to the cruel dismissal that had once shattered her world. This strategic omission was deliberate. Avery had learned that controlling her narrative meant choosing which chapters to share. In the laboratory section of Reynolds Tech's Manhattan office, 14-year-old Isaiah stood surrounded by engineers twice his age, directing them with a quiet authority that belied his youth. Gone was the small boy who once slept on a shelter cot against his mother's chest. In his place stood a young man whose intellect had already earned him recognition in academic journals and whose algorithms formed the backbone of their most successful products. The neural adaptation needs to be more responsive to cognitive patterns, not just input variations, Isaiah explained, sketching a complex diagram on the whiteboard. The senior developers, all with advanced degrees from prestigious universities, watched attentively as the teenager identified flaws in their approach with remarkable precision. From the doorway, Avery observed the scene with pride tinged with something like wonder. Isaiah had inherited Michael's analytical mind and commanding presence, but these gifts had been shaped by something Michael lacked: empathy that came from understanding struggle. "Your son is extraordinary," murmured Jacob Chen, Reynolds Tech's newly appointed CFO, who had joined her in the doorway. "I've worked with PhDs who couldn't grasp complex systems the way he does." "He's always been that way," Avery replied, watching Isaiah deftly answer a challenging question from one of the senior developers. "He sees patterns others miss." Later that evening in their Central Park apartment, Avery prepared a simple dinner while Isaiah finished homework assignments far beyond typical high school level. Their home reflected their success without ostentation, spacious and elegant, filled with books and technology rather than showy luxuries. "Mom?" Isaiah looked up from his advanced calculus. "Professor Nakamura from MIT called again. He wants me to co-author a paper on computational linguistics." Avery set down the knife she'd been using to chop vegetables. "That's the third request this month from different universities." Isaiah shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention his abilities attracted. "I just find linguistics interesting. The mathematical patterns in language acquisition are fascinating." Avery studied her son's face, the same strong jawline as Michael, the same intensely focused eyes. Yet there was a gentleness there, a thoughtfulness that was entirely his own. "Harvard sent another packet today," she said, nodding toward a thick envelope on the counter. "They're very persistent about early admission." "Would you mind if I went?" Isaiah asked, his expression uncharacteristically vulnerable. "I know 15 is young, but their advanced program, if it's what you want, we'll make it work," Avery interrupted, crossing the kitchen to embrace him. "You've earned every opportunity." Later that night, after Isaiah had gone to bed, Avery found herself standing before the small lockbox she kept in her closet. Inside lay the remnants of a past life: the paternity waiver Michael had forced her to sign, the cashier's check receipt for $10,000, a single faded photograph of Michael she'd been unable to destroy despite everything. She rarely allowed herself these moments of reflection, but Isaiah's potential early departure for Harvard had stirred memories she usually kept carefully compartmentalized. The boy in the next room, brilliant, kind, determined, had been created in part by a man who had deemed him unworthy of existence. "Reynolds, not Thornton," she whispered to the empty room, closing the box decisively. The following morning, during her weekly review of industry news, a small item caught Avery's attention. "Thornton Industries seeks new direction amid declining market share." The accompanying photo showed Michael at a shareholders' meeting, his expression strained as he defended the company's performance. Avery felt no satisfaction at the evidence of his struggles. She had long ago stopped measuring her success against his failures. Still, the contrast was impossible to ignore. While Thornton Industries clung to outdated manufacturing models, Reynolds Tech was being courted by major technology companies for potential partnerships. That afternoon, Isaiah appeared in her office doorway with an unexpected question. "Mom, why is my last name Reynolds and not Williams?" Avery set down her tablet, giving him her full attention. The question wasn't entirely surprising. Isaiah had always been methodical in gathering information, filling gaps in his understanding. "I changed my name after Eleanor died. she explained. She left us her home, her support, her belief when we had nothing. Taking her name was my way of honoring that legacy, and I wanted you to carry it too. Isaiah nodded, processing this information with his characteristic thoroughness. And what about my father's name? Wouldn't that traditionally be part of my identity? The question hung in the air between them. Avery had always answered Isaiah's questions about his father with age-appropriate honesty, but had never volunteered information beyond what he directly asked. Your father chose not to give you his name, she said carefully. He signed legal documents relinquishing that right. Isaiah's expression remained neutral, analytical rather than emotional. Does he know about me now? That I'm going to Harvard at 15? Avery hesitated. I don't know. We haven't had contact since before you were born. Are you ever curious about him? Isaiah pressed with the directness that characterized all his inquiries. About what he's doing now? A flash of memory, Michael's cruel smile as he pushed the envelope of cash across his desk. You'll never amount to anything, Avery. Sometimes, she admitted, but not in the way you might think. He made choices that shaped our path, but those choices don't define us. Isaiah studied her with those penetrating eyes. I sometimes wonder about the genetic components of my cognitive abilities, nature versus nurture, whether certain aspects of my thinking patterns might be inherited. The vulnerability beneath the scientific language was clear. Avery moved from behind her desk to sit beside him on the office sofa. There are times I see him in you, she acknowledged. Your analytical mind, your focus, but who you are, your compassion, your vision, your integrity, those come from the choices you make, not your genetics. Isaiah nodded, apparently satisfied with this assessment. I've been accepted to present at the National Science Foundation's Young Innovators Forum next month, he said, changing the subject with typical abruptness. Will you come? I wouldn't miss it, Avery promised, grateful for her son's resilience. 3 days later, Isaiah appeared in her home office, face uncharacteristically troubled. I found something, he said, placing his tablet on her desk. The screen displayed an archived business article from 7 years earlier, a profile of Thornton Industries featuring a photograph of Michael accepting an industry award. The resemblance between father and son was unmistakable. I ran facial recognition software comparing my features to prominent business leaders in the automotive sector, Isaiah explained, his voice carefully controlled. The algorithm flagged a 93% probability match. Avery felt her carefully constructed narrative crumbling. Isaiah, Michael Thornton is my biological father, isn't he? The directness of the question demanded equal honesty. Yes. Isaiah nodded, not surprised but processing. Did he reject us because of racial bias? Statistical analysis of executive demographics in Southern manufacturing companies suggests it was more complicated than that, Avery interrupted, unwilling to reduce Michael's cruelty to impersonal statistics. He had family expectations, career plans that didn't include us. He didn't want me, Isaiah translated, his analytical mind cutting through euphemism. He didn't want the responsibility of a family, Avery corrected. It was never about you as a person. Isaiah was quiet for a long moment. May I see the legal documents? Avery hesitated, then retrieved the lockbox from her closet. The paternity waiver was yellowed at the edges, but Michael's signature remained bold and definitive. This was his choice, she said softly, as Isaiah studied the document with academic detachment. Our strength came from moving forward. Later that evening, Avery found Isaiah in his room, surrounded by holographic displays of his latest neural network project. Are you okay? She asked, sitting on the edge of his bed. I'm processing, he replied, eyes still on the swirling data points. It's interesting to consider how different life trajectories can emerge from single decision points. 3 weeks later, Reynolds Tech received an acquisition offer that stunned the technology sector. $350 million from Silicon Valley giant Next Gen Technologies. The offer arrived during a board meeting, causing an immediate stir among the executives and investors gathered around the conference table. "This is unprecedented for a company our size in this sector," said Jacob Chen, studying the terms. "They're clearly after Isaiah's adaptive algorithm patents." All eyes turned to Avery, who sat at the head of the table reviewing the document with practiced composure. The room fell silent, executives and investors awaiting her reaction to what would be a life-changing windfall for everyone with equity. "No," she said finally, setting down the document. "Avery," Sophia Zhang said carefully, "perhaps we should discuss this more thoroughly before—" "We didn't build Reynolds Tech to sell it," Avery interrupted. "We built it to transform how technology serves human needs. NextGen would gut our accessibility focus and absorb our patents into their ecosystem." The following day, the Wall Street Journal ran the headline, "Reynolds refuses 350 meters, analysts question strategy." Industry commentators debated whether Avery's decision reflected visionary leadership or emotional attachment clouding business judgment. "You could retire a very wealthy woman," Sophia observed over lunch at an upscale Manhattan restaurant. "Why refuse?" Avery gazed out at the bustling city street. "Because I didn't build this to sell. I built it to transform." In Nashville, Michael Thornton sat across from his father in the wood-paneled conference room that had witnessed 3 generations of Thornton leadership. The quarterly results projected on the screen told a story of declining market share and eroding profit margins. "Your strategy isn't working," Edward Thornton said bluntly, his weathered face set in lines of disapproval. "Asian manufacturers are undercutting us on traditional components, and you've failed to establish any meaningful presence in the electric vehicle sector." "We're developing partnerships," Michael began. "We're failing," his father interrupted, "and the board is questioning whether you're the right person to lead this company through transition." Later that evening, alone in his office with a glass of bourbon, Michael scrolled through industry news on his tablet. A Forbes notification caught his attention. The annual 40 Under 40 list had been published. He tapped the link, scanning the faces of young entrepreneurs reshaping the business landscape. His finger froze mid-scroll. The woman staring back at him from the screen was almost unrecognizable at first, confident, polished, emanating success. But those eyes? He knew those eyes. The name beneath the photograph confirmed what seemed impossible. Avery Reynolds, CEO of Reynolds Tech. The Avery he had dismissed. The Avery he had paid to disappear. As Michael read the profile with increasing disbelief, learning about the adaptive technology empire valued at over $500 million, his phone chimed with a text from his fiancée, Caroline Henderson. "Daddy's concerned about the McKinley contract. Call me when you can." In New York, Avery arrived home to find Isaiah holding an envelope bearing Harvard's crimson insignia. "It's official," he said, handing her the acceptance letter. "They want me to start the special advanced program next semester. Full scholarship." Avery read the letter, pride mingling with the bittersweet recognition that her son was ready to begin his independent journey at just 15. The boy who had once been her sole purpose was now a young man prepared to make his mark on the world. That weekend, a CNN business segment featured Avery and Isaiah discussing Reynolds Tech's innovative approach to adaptive technology. The interviewer marveled at the teenagers' articulate explanations of complex neural networks. "Some call you a prodigy," the interviewer said. "How do you see yourself?" "I'm just someone interested in solving problems," Isaiah replied with the humility Avery had instilled in him. "The real innovation happened when my mother recognized that technology should adapt to humans, not the other way around." As the interview concluded, Avery's phone buzzed with a notification. The Metropolitan Business Forum, the most prestigious gathering of technology leaders in New York, had sent an invitation. "It is with great pleasure that we invite Avery Reynolds, CEO of Reynolds Tech, as keynote speaker at this year's Metropolitan Business Forum." While confirming her participation as the main speaker at the industry's most important event, Avery had no idea that among the 500 executives and investors in attendance would be Michael Thornton, desperate to save his failing family business and about to face the most painful consequence of his past choices. Avery's fingers moved across her tablet, making final adjustments to her keynote presentation for tomorrow's Metropolitan Business Forum. The Manhattan skyline glittered beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows of her penthouse, a constellation of lights against the darkness. She paused to roll her shoulders, easing the tension that had built after hours of meticulous preparation. "You're still working." Isaiah's voice came from the doorway. He carried 2 mugs of chamomile tea, a nightly ritual they'd maintained since he was old enough to boil water. "Just finishing," Avery said, accepting the steaming mug gratefully. "The adaptive interface demonstration needs to be flawless. There will be 500 industry leaders watching." "It will be," Isaiah assured her, settling into the chair opposite her desk. At 14, he already carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone much older. "I've triple-checked the neural response algorithms. The demonstration will adapt perfectly to whatever parameters they throw at it." Avery studied her son over the rim of her mug. In the soft lamplight, his resemblance to Michael was particularly striking. The same thoughtful brow, the same analytical gaze. Yet where Michael's eyes had always held calculation, Isaiah's reflected compassion and curiosity. "Are you nervous?" he asked, observing her with characteristic perception. Avery considered deflecting, then decided on honesty. "A little. It's not the audience size. I've spoken to larger groups. It's just—" She gestured vaguely at the presentation displayed on her screen. 15 years is a long time to build something from nothing. Isaiah's response came with wisdom beyond his years. It wasn't from nothing. It was from everything that you are. The simple truth of his statement warmed her more than the tea. Avery set down her mug and opened a folder on her desktop. "Want to see something?" Together they scrolled through photographs documenting Reynolds Tech's evolution. The first tiny office with its 3 battered desks. The team of 5 celebrating their first major contract. Isaiah at 10, explaining his initial algorithm concept to fascinated developers. The ribbon cutting at their current headquarters. "We've come so far," Avery murmured. "Remember this?" Isaiah asked, pointing to an image of their first apartment after Eleanor's death, cramped and utilitarian, with computers and technical manuals occupying every available surface. "How could I forget? You used to fall asleep under my desk while I worked on prototypes." They continued through the visual history until reaching a particular image that made Avery pause, the framed napkin where she'd sketched her first interface design. "This was the beginning," she said, touching the screen gently. "Sitting in that library with Eleanor, explaining how technology could be different, more accessible. I drew this while you napped in your stroller." Isaiah studied the image thoughtfully. "You should include this in your presentation tomorrow. Show them where revolutionary ideas can come from." "Perhaps I will," Avery agreed, making a note to add the image to her slides. They spent another hour reviewing the presentation, Isaiah offering occasional suggestions with his characteristic precision. Finally, Avery closed her tablet and stretched. "Time for both of us to rest. Tomorrow's a big day." As they prepared to leave the home office, Isaiah paused by her extensive wardrobe. "What are you wearing tomorrow?" Avery smiled. "I was thinking the purple Armani." Isaiah nodded approvingly. "Good choice. You'll be the most stylish CEO in the room." His teasing lightened the moment, and Avery felt a rush of gratitude for this extraordinary person she'd raised. Brilliant, but never arrogant. Perceptive, but never cruel. "Good night, my brilliant boy," she said, embracing him briefly. "Good night, Mom. You're going to be amazing tomorrow." Across Manhattan, in a suite at the Plaza Hotel, Michael Thornton spread financial reports across his king-sized bed, the grim numbers illuminated by the bedside lamp. Thornton Industries' third-quarter results showed continued decline in both revenue and market share. Asian competitors had undercut their pricing on traditional components, while the company's belated attempts to enter the electric vehicle market had yielded minimal traction. Michael loosened his tie and poured himself a generous scotch from the minibar. The Metropolitan Business Forum represented perhaps his last opportunity to secure the partnerships and investments needed to revitalize the family business. His father's parting words before he'd left Nashville echoed in his mind, "Don't come back without solutions. The board is losing patience." The phone rang, interrupting his brooding. His father's name flashed on the screen. "Any progress?" Edward Thornton demanded without preamble when Michael answered. "I've scheduled meetings with 3 potential investors tomorrow," Michael replied, trying to project confidence he didn't feel. "The forum will provide opportunities to—" "Opportunities won't save us," his father cut in. "We need concrete commitments. The Henderson partnership would have given us the capital infusion we needed, but your broken engagement closed that door." Michael winced at the reminder. Caroline Henderson had ended their engagement 2 months earlier, citing fundamental differences in values, but making it clear that her family was unwilling to tie their fortune to a company in decline. "I'll find new investors," Michael insisted. "Thornton Industries won't fail on my watch." After ending the call, Michael returned to reviewing the forum's participant list, searching for potential salvation among the names of technology executives and venture capitalists. He paused at a familiar-sounding name, Reynolds. Avery Reynolds, CEO of Reynolds Tech. A vague sense of recognition tickled at his memory. Reynolds. Where had he heard that name recently? He'd been so consumed with Thornton Industries' problems that he'd paid little attention to developments outside the automotive sector. Curious, he opened his tablet and searched for Avery Reynolds, CEO. The results loaded instantly, displaying recent news articles and profiles. One headline from a technology blog caught his eye. Avery Reynolds, from waitress to tech CEO. Waitress? Something clicked in Michael's mind, a distant memory trying to surface. He tapped on the article, which opened with a professional photograph of a striking black woman with silver-streaked dreadlocks, confident eyes, and an elegant smile. For a moment, he didn't make the connection. This poised executive bore little resemblance to the young woman he remembered from Nashville. But as he read further, details aligned. A single mother who had built an accessibility technology company now valued at nearly $800 million. "It can't be," he murmured, enlarging the photograph to study it more carefully. The sophisticated woman on his screen seemed worlds away from the tearful bartender he'd dismissed from his office 15 years ago. Yet the eyes, those expressive eyes that had once looked at him with hurt and betrayal, were unmistakable. Michael set down his tablet, a cold sensation spreading through his chest. Avery Williams, now Reynolds apparently, was not only attending the forum tomorrow, but was listed as the keynote speaker. The girl he'd told would never amount to anything had built an empire nearly 7 times more valuable than Thornton Industries. He searched for more information, scanning articles about Reynolds Tech's innovative adaptive technologies. One photo stopped his scrolling, Avery accepting an innovation award, accompanied by a teenage boy identified as Isaiah Reynolds, the company's young programming prodigy. Michael enlarged the image, his breath catching. The boy, 14 or 15 by his estimation, had his mother's complexion but bore a startling resemblance to the Thornton men. The same jawline, the same penetrating gaze that Michael saw in his own mirror every morning. His son, the child he had rejected before birth, offering money to take care of the problem. Now apparently a technological genius helping drive his mother's success. Michael poured another scotch with an unsteady hand, his mind racing. Would she recognize him tomorrow? What would she say? Did the boy, Isaiah, know about him? In the living room of Avery's penthouse, she gave her presentation one final review before bed. Her purple Armani suit hung pressed and ready for morning, her notes were organized, and the demonstration was thoroughly tested. Everything was prepared for what would be one of the most significant appearances of her career. As she closed her laptop, her phone chimed with a notification. The Metropolitan Business Forum had sent an updated attendee list. Avery scrolled through it idly, noting potential partners and competitors who would be present. Her finger froze mid-scroll. Thornton, Michael, Executive Vice President, Thornton Industries. For a moment she couldn't breathe. The name on her screen, a name she had trained herself not to think about, sent a jolt through her system. Her first instinct was to check if Isaiah was nearby, but he had already retired to his room. Avery set down the phone and walked to the window, pressing her palm against the cool glass as she gazed at the city below. After 15 years, she would be in the same room as Michael Thornton. The man who had dismissed her as worthless would witness firsthand the empire she had built. She had imagined this moment occasionally over the years, a fantasy of vindication that had gradually lost its appeal as her success had become its own reward. Now that it might actually happen, she felt not the triumph she had once anticipated, but a calm certainty in her own worth. If they did encounter each other tomorrow, Michael would be forced to see the truth. The woman he had discarded as irrelevant had become one of the most influential voices in technology. The child he had rejected as a mixed-race bastard was now a prodigy whose innovations were reshaping an industry. Avery turned from the window, her reflection in the glass showing not the frightened young woman who had once left Thornton Industries in tears, but a confident CEO prepared to command a room of industry leaders. In their respective spaces that night, separated by just 20 Manhattan blocks, Avery and Michael prepared for sleep with very different emotions. She with quiet confidence in the life and company she had built, he with growing anxiety about the confrontation that might await. Avery checked on Isaiah one last time, finding him asleep surrounded by technical journals and tablet screens displaying code in multiple windows. Even in rest, his mind seemed to process information. She gently removed a tablet from his slack grip and pulled his blanket higher. Michael, meanwhile, lay awake in his hotel room, financial reports abandoned, scrolling through every article he could find about Avery Reynolds and Reynolds Tech. Each new discovery, her company's valuation, their groundbreaking patents, Isaiah's academic achievements, twisted the knife of his 15-year-old mistake. As dawn approached, both finally drifted to sleep, Avery peaceful in the knowledge of all she had accomplished, Michael restless with the recognition of all he had thrown away. That night, separated by just 20 blocks of Manhattan, neither could imagine how their lives would collide in the morning, when the past and present would intertwine in a public confrontation that would forever change the destiny of Thornton Industries and reveal the secret kept for 15 years. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Avery's penthouse as she stood before the full-length mirror, adjusting the lapels of her deep purple Armani suit. The rich fabric contrasted beautifully with her silver-streaked dreads, arranged in an elegant updo. 15 years had transformed the tearful, desperate young woman from Nashville into this commanding presence, CEO, innovator, mother. Her reflection showed not just success, but vindication. "Ready?" Isaiah appeared in the doorway, already dressed in a charcoal suit that made him look older than his 14 years. "As I'll ever be," Avery replied, securing a simple pearl necklace, Eleanor's, her one concession to sentimentality on this pivotal day. Their car arrived at the Javits Center 30 minutes before Avery's keynote was scheduled to begin. The Metropolitan Business Forum had transformed the main exhibition hall into an impressive auditorium, company logos projected on massive screens, seating for 500 of the most influential executives and investors in the technology sector. "Ms. Reynolds, we're so honored to have you," gushed the event coordinator, leading them to the green room. "We've got a full house waiting." Across the venue, Michael Thornton showed his credentials at the registration desk, receiving a badge and program. He'd barely slept, rehearsing potential interactions with Avery in his mind throughout the night. Would she publicly acknowledge their past? Would she ignore him completely? His stomach churned with anxiety as he scanned the program once more. 9:30 a.m. Keynote address. Adaptive technology, the human-centered future. Avery Reynolds, CEO, Reynolds Tech. Michael found his assigned seat in the third row, perfectly positioned to witness Avery's triumph. He adjusted his tie nervously, glancing around at the gathering crowd of industry luminaries. 15 years ago, he'd sat at the pinnacle of privilege, heir to a family fortune, while dismissing Avery as irrelevant to his future. Now he sat in a crowd assembled to hear her wisdom. The lights dimmed precisely at 9:30. The forum's chairman approached the podium, tapping the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, it is with great pleasure that we present our keynote speaker, Avery Reynolds, founder and CEO of Reynolds Tech, recently named Entrepreneur of the Year by Business America, and one of the 50 most influential women in technology. Michael froze in his seat as the introduction continued, listing accomplishments that each felt like an indictment of his past cruelty. The water glass in his hand trembled slightly as he raised it to his suddenly dry lips. The audience erupted in applause as Avery strode onto the stage with graceful confidence. The lighting caught the subtle shimmer of her suit, creating a momentary purple glow that seemed to emphasize her royalty in this domain. Her poised smile revealed nothing of the struggle that had preceded this moment. Michael's breath caught. This woman commanding the stage bore little physical resemblance to the young waitress he'd once known. Where that girl had been hesitant, this woman radiated absolute self-assurance. Where poverty had once left shadows under her eyes, success now gave her skin a luminous quality. Yet beneath these transformations, her eyes remained unchanged. The same expressive eyes that had once looked at him with hurt and betrayal, now surveying the crowd with calm authority. "Good morning," Avery began, her voice melodious yet firm through the sound system. "Thank you for that generous introduction." Michael sank lower in his seat, irrationally hoping she wouldn't notice him among the hundreds of faces. At the same time, a perverse part of him wanted recognition, acknowledgement that he had once been significant in her life. The Reynolds Tech journey began with a simple question. Avery continued, her voice commanding the rapt attention of every person in the room. How can we make technology truly universal, not just accessible to those with different abilities, but adaptively responsive to each user's unique needs? As she outlined the company's evolution, Michael calculated rapidly in his head. $780 million valuation, 300 employees across 3 continents, dozens of patents. Each milestone she mentioned felt like a personal rebuke. Today, after our latest funding round, we continue pursuing that question with greater resources than ever before, while our market valuation has surpassed $780 million. The figure hung in the air like an accusation. The Thornton Industries, after 3 generations of family leadership, was struggling to maintain a $120 million valuation. Michael swallowed hard, acutely aware that the company he had prioritized over Avery and their child was now worth a fraction of what she had built from nothing. Our most recent innovation, developed by our team led by my son, a true prodigy who has just been accepted to Harvard at 15 years of age, promises to revolutionize how devices adapt to the specific needs of each user. The massive screen behind Avery illuminated with a photograph of Isaiah receiving an innovation award, his serious expression and confident stance unmistakably echoing Michael's own bearing. The resemblance was so striking that Michael felt the air leave his lungs in a silent gasp. Several executives seated near him glanced his way, perhaps noting his sudden pallor. His son, the bastard he had rejected. Now a technological genius headed to Harvard, architect of innovations that had helped build his mother's empire. For the next 40 minutes, Michael sat in agonizing stillness as Avery detailed achievements that made his own career seem mediocre by comparison. International patents, partnerships with technology giants, humanitarian projects recognized by the United Nations. She spoke with passion about creating technology that adapted to human needs rather than forcing humans to adapt to technology's limitations. Technology should serve humanity, Not the other way around, she concluded, her words met with enthusiastic applause. At Reynolds Tech, we're building adaptive systems that recognize and respond to the beautiful diversity of human experience. Thank you. The standing ovation was immediate and thunderous. Michael remained seated, his legs seemingly unable to support his weight. As executives around him rose to their feet, offering enthusiastic appreciation, he felt utterly diminished, not just professionally, but as a human being. During the subsequent networking session, Michael observed from a distance as Avery moved through the crowd with effortless grace. CEOs of companies much larger than Thornton Industries gravitated toward her, eager for a few minutes of her attention. Her laugh occasionally carried across the room, confident, unrestrained, nothing like the careful politeness he remembered. After 2 drinks to steady his nerves, Michael finally approached the circle surrounding Avery. He waited patiently at its edge until he could maneuver into her line of sight. The moment of recognition was electric. For a microsecond, surprise flickered in her eyes, quickly replaced by something more disturbing: absolute indifference. "Avery," he said, extending his hand, his voice sounding strained even to his own ears. "What an extraordinary surprise." She shook his hand briefly, with the same professional courtesy she would offer any stranger. "Michael Thornton, correct? Thornton Industries?" The casual dismissal left him momentarily speechless. She acted as though he were just another executive, someone she might have encountered briefly at a previous conference. As though 15 years ago he hadn't shattered her world. "Yes, exactly," he managed, struggling to maintain his composure. "I'm impressed with your presentation. You've built something remarkable." "Thank you," she replied with polite detachment. "Your name sounds vaguely familiar. You manufacture automotive components in Tennessee, don't you? How are you managing the transition to electric vehicles?" The precision of her attack left him breathless. She had identified exactly the technological shift that was destroying Thornton Industries' relevance. The question wasn't innocent. It was a scalpel, expertly wielded. "We're adapting," he stammered, feeling sweat form along his hairline. "Actually, I'm in New York seeking potential innovation partners." Avery smiled cordially, but her eyes remained cold. "Fascinating. If you'll excuse me, I need to—" "Mom!" A young voice interrupted the excruciating exchange. Isaiah Reynolds approached, carrying several tablets, his bearing confident despite his youth. "Mr. Nakamura from Toshiba wants to discuss the Tokyo production line implementation immediately." Michael felt his legs weaken as he found himself face to face with the living embodiment of his greatest mistake. The boy was tall for his age, with the same distinctive posture that characterized Thornton men across generations. But there was something more in him, an intelligence that shone in his eyes, a natural confidence that Michael had never possessed as a teenager. "Isaiah, this is Michael Thornton of Thornton Industries," Avery introduced casually, as if naming a complete stranger. "Mr. Thornton, my son and Director of Innovation, Isaiah Reynolds." The teenager extended his hand professionally, his grip firm and assured. No flicker of recognition crossed his face. The name clearly meant nothing to him. "Pleasure to meet you, sir," Isaiah said with impeccable manners. "Does your company work with adaptive solutions?" "No," Michael answered, his voice barely audible. "Traditional components mainly." "I see," Isaiah replied, his slight disinterest evident. "Well, if you'll excuse us, we have an important meeting." As they turned to leave, Michael found his voice again, desperation overriding his pride. "Avery, could we talk privately? Please, just 5 minutes." She hesitated, then nodded briefly. "Isaiah, go with Ms. Chen. I'll join you shortly." In a quieter corner of the hall, Michael finally found himself alone with the woman whose life he had so carelessly derailed. "He doesn't know who I am," he said, the realization both painful and relieving. "No, he doesn't," Avery confirmed, her tone matter-of-fact, "and you legally renounced any right to be part of his life." Avery, I was young, stupid, pressured by my family. And I was a waitress without value, a mistake in your life, she interrupted, her tone surprisingly calm given the content of her words. Your exact words, if I recall correctly. I was wrong, Michael admitted, feeling cold sweat running down his back. Completely wrong. You've built something extraordinary. And our son? My son, Avery corrected firmly. Isaiah is my son. You're merely the genetic donor who signed a paternity waiver. Michael glanced around nervously, aware that nearby executives were beginning to notice their tense conversation. Could we meet after this event? Dinner, perhaps? I'd like to know him. Maybe explain what exactly? Avery's voice remained controlled, but her eyes hardened. That you treated me like garbage? That you told me I would never be anything? That you abandoned me pregnant with $10,000 and the demand that I abort your child? Each word made Michael shrink further into himself. He noticed several executives turning their heads, catching fragments of their exchange. How much is Thornton Industries worth currently, Michael? Avery asked softly, knowing the answer perfectly well. Your family still controls the majority of shares, doesn't it? About 120 million, he mumbled, acutely aware of his diminished status. Interesting, she said with a slight smile. My last valuation was 780 million, and Isaiah holds 25% of the company. Her smile widened fractionally. That mediocre waitress and the mixed-race bastard are worth 6 times more than your entire family dynasty. Delicious, isn't it? Jacob Chen, Reynolds Tech's CFO, approached at that moment. Sorry to interrupt, but we have that urgent situation to resolve, Avery. Of course, Jacob. Mr. Thornton was just leaving. She turned to go, then paused. Oh, and Michael? If you even think about approaching my son without my permission, I'll reveal every sordid detail of our past to the specialized press. Imagine how your conservative investors would react. As she walked away confidently, surrounded by her executive team, Michael realized that several people had witnessed the encounter. Whispers were already beginning to circulate. In panic, he attempted a casual smile, but understood that his relevance in this environment was virtually non-existent compared to hers. While he stood frozen in place, watching Avery effortlessly command the attention of everyone she encountered, Michael couldn't imagine that the brief interaction with Avery was just the beginning of his nightmare, or that a reporter from Tech Insider had observed enough of their tense exchange to begin unraveling the secret he had buried 15 years ago. Michael remained rooted to the spot as Avery disappeared into the crowd, her purple Armani suit creating a regal silhouette against the sea of conventional business attire. The confidence in her stride spoke volumes. This was her domain now, her empire, built from the ashes of his rejection. Several nearby executives were watching him with curious expressions, no doubt wondering about the tense exchange they had witnessed. Interesting conversation? A woman with a media badge pinned to her blazer appeared at his elbow. Cassandra Moore, Tech Insider. You seemed quite engrossed with Ms. Reynolds. Michael forced his features into a neutral expression. Just congratulating her on an impressive presentation, if you'll excuse me. He retreated to the nearest restroom, splashing cold water on his face. His reflection in the mirror looked haggard, eyes haunted with the realization of what he had discarded 15 years ago. Not just a relationship, but a son. A brilliant boy who might have carried the Thornton name with distinction. Instead, Isaiah bore another man's surname while carrying Michael's genetic legacy. When he emerged, the forum had shifted to breakout sessions. Michael found himself unable to focus on the panels about automotive innovation that had been his primary reason for attending. Instead, he kept scanning the crowd for glimpses of Avery or Isaiah, his mind replaying their brief interactions on endless loop. That evening, in his hotel room, Michael's phone vibrated with a notification. Tech Insider had published a short piece from the forum. Tense exchange between Reynolds Tech CEO and Southern manufacturing heir raises eyebrows. The brief article speculated about the apparently strained conversation between Avery Reynolds and Michael Thornton. noting their contrasting business trajectories and wondering about possible past connections. No concrete allegations, but enough to plant seeds of curiosity. By morning, 3 other industry blogs had picked up the story, each adding subtle embellishments. One mentioned that Thornton Industries was seeking investments to stay competitive. Another noted the striking resemblance between Isaiah Reynolds and certain members of the Thornton family, attributing it to interesting coincidence. Michael's flight back to Nashville felt interminable. When he finally reached Thornton Industries headquarters, his father was waiting in the executive conference room, the company's quarterly reports spread across the polished mahogany table. The elder Thornton's expression promised no warm welcome. "What the hell happened in New York?" Edward Thornton demanded without preamble. "Henderson called this morning to cancel our negotiation, said there were concerning rumors about the family's reputation." Michael loosened his tie, the room suddenly stifling. "It's complicated, Dad." "Simplify it," his father snapped. "What does Avery Reynolds have to do with you? The whole industry is buzzing about your confrontation." The blood drained from Michael's face. "How do you know about Avery?" Edward Thornton tossed a tablet across the table. On the screen was an email from Caroline Henderson, Michael's former fiancée, with a link to one of the speculative articles. Her message was brief. "Is this why you were so resistant to children? Were you hiding something all along?" "Start talking," his father demanded. "Now." The explanation emerged in halting fragments. The affair with a bartender 15 years ago, the pregnancy, the payoff, the signed documents. With each revelation, Edward Thornton's expression hardened further. "You paid her to get an abortion," he finally said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I gave her money to handle it however she wanted," Michael corrected weakly. "And instead she built a technology company worth nearly $1 billion, his father concluded, "while raising your son to become the genius currently making headlines in every business publication." The elder Thornton's laugh was without humor. "I always said you lacked judgment, but this exceeds even my lowest expectations." The following morning, Michael awoke to another email notification, this time from Caroline's father, officially terminating all business discussions between Henderson Innovations and Thornton Industries, citing incompatible ethical standards. Before Michael could process this blow, his assistant knocked timidly on his office door. "Sir, there's a reporter from Business Chronicle asking for comment on a story they're running tomorrow. Something about a personal connection between you and Avery Reynolds." The situation deteriorated rapidly. A journalist with unexpected connections had uncovered court records of the paternity waiver filing in Nashville. Within 48 hours, the story exploded across business media. The secret of the CEO: how Thornton heir rejected future tech prodigy. Michael watched in horror as Thornton Industries stock dropped 17% in 3 days. Board members called emergency meetings. Longtime family friends suddenly became unavailable for dinner. His father's disappointment calcified into cold fury. "The board meeting is at 3, Edward informed him after a week of media speculation. "They'll be voting on leadership changes." "Dad, I can explain to them." "You've explained enough," his father interrupted. "You abandoned your child and threw away $10,000 to hide your mistake. Now that mistake is worth more than our entire company, and everyone knows it. Your position here is untenable." By evening, Michael was no longer executive vice president of Thornton Industries. His family company, the legacy he had prioritized over Avery and their child, had removed him from leadership to pursue other opportunities, according to the press release. In his apartment that night, Michael scrolled through the relentless coverage. Each article seemed to take particular delight in the contrast. The struggling heir who had rejected his pregnant girlfriend versus the self-made woman who had transformed adversity into extraordinary success. Even more painful were the features about Isaiah Reynolds, the teenage tech genius, whose innovations were revolutionizing adaptive technology. Multiple publications noted his acceptance to Harvard at 15, his published papers, his remarkable poise in interviews. One particularly popular video showed Isaiah demonstrating Reynolds Tech's latest innovation at a conference, his articulate explanation belying his youth. The resemblance to Michael was unmistakable, the same gestures, the same analytical precision. But there was something else in Isaiah, something Michael recognized from Avery, a compassionate intelligence, a genuine desire to improve lives rather than merely accumulate wealth. After 3 days of sleepless nights and unanswered calls to former colleagues, Michael made an impulsive decision. He booked a flight back to New York, determined to speak with Avery properly, to somehow address the damage he had caused. Using contacts from his diminished network, he obtained her residential address, an exclusive building on Park Avenue with views of Central Park. The doorman initially refused him entry, but a generous tip and a story about urgent business matters eventually gained him access to the residence directory. When Avery answered the door, her lack of surprise was telling. "The building security alerted me to your arrival," she explained, allowing him into her home with obvious reluctance. "You have 10 minutes." The apartment was elegant but understated. Original artwork on the walls, comfortable yet sophisticated furniture, and floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the Manhattan skyline. Among the art pieces were photographs documenting Isaiah's life. As an infant in the arms of an elderly woman Michael assumed was Eleanor, as a young child receiving science awards, as a teenager alongside Silicon Valley luminaries. "He is extraordinary," Michael said quietly, studying the images of the son he had never known. "Harvard at 15. I barely got into Vanderbilt with mediocre grades." "What do you want, Michael?" Avery asked, maintaining her distance. "I want to be part of his life," Michael blurted out. "Part of your lives. I can make up for lost time. I can—" "Make up for it?" Avery's laugh held no humor. "You think you can compensate for 15 years? The nights I spent crying, the 3 simultaneous jobs, the medical bills I could barely pay? I can try!" Michael exclaimed desperately. "Look, Thornton is in trouble, but I have contacts, experience. I could add value to Reynolds Tech. A merger or strategic partnership." Avery stared at him with disbelief. "You really think this is about money? That I'm seeking some kind of financial revenge?" The apartment door opened before Michael could respond. Isaiah entered, freezing when he saw the visitor. Recognition dawned instantly, not from memory, but from the unmistakable genetic mirror between them. "Isaiah," Avery said softly, "this is Michael Thornton. He is your biological father." The teenager studied Michael with a penetrating gaze that made the older man feel completely exposed, as if every poor decision in his life was being catalogued and analyzed. "Interesting," Isaiah finally said. "Curious timing for your appearance, considering our recent investment round." "It's not that," Michael attempted to explain. "I made a terrible mistake. Several mistakes. When I saw you at the forum, I realized—" "What, exactly?" Isaiah interrupted. "That you wasted the chance to know an exceptional person like my mother? Or that I'm now a valuable asset you'd like to claim?" The teenager's maturity and perception left Michael speechless. "You know," Isaiah continued thoughtfully, "I have a friend whose father abandoned their family but paid consistent child support and attempted to maintain contact. That was understandable negligence. What you did was calculated cruelty." He checked his watch. "I have a video conference with my development team in 10 minutes. It was informative meeting you." With that, Isaiah walked toward what was presumably his bedroom, leaving Michael devastated in his wake. "He knew?" Michael asked, his voice trembling. "Not specifics, but the essence," Avery replied. "I never lied to him. When he asked about his father at 8 years old, I told him you had chosen not to be part of our lives and signed documents relinquishing paternity. I understand your anger, Avery, but he is my son. I have rights." "No, Michael," Avery cut him off firmly. "You don't have rights. You have consequences. The consequences of your choices." Her calm demeanor remained unshaken. I won't legally prevent you from attempting a relationship with Isaiah because I respect my son's autonomy, but I won't facilitate that process either." Michael felt the weight of 15 years of absence crushing him. "What can I do to fix this?" "Nothing," Avery replied simply. "Some things can't be fixed. They can only be accepted." The specialized media exploded in the weeks that followed. The investigative journalist connected all the dots, publishing a detailed article, "The CEO's Secret: How the Thornton Heir Rejected the Future Tech Prodigy." The story went viral in business circles, analyzing how Avery had risen from abandonment to industry leadership while Thornton Industries faltered under its heir's guidance. Michael's personal life disintegrated alongside his professional reputation. The Henderson family publicly announced the termination of his engagement to Caroline, citing ethical incompatibilities. His father, furious about the scandal, forced his resignation from the company completely. Meanwhile, Forbes approached Avery and Isaiah for a cover story. "The Reynolds Dynasty: How Mother and Son Revolutionized Assistive Technology." The feature highlighted Avery's journey from poverty to commanding a nearly billion-dollar company, without mentioning Michael once. 3 months after the explosive meeting, Michael, now working as an independent consultant after his departure from the family business, received an envelope. Inside was a simple card with Isaiah's elegant handwriting. "After reflection, I've decided I would like to know you as a person, separate from the circumstances of my birth. Not from obligation or expectation, but from scientific curiosity about nature versus nurture. If this interests you, we could begin with monthly lunches. No agenda, no expectations of a paternal relationship. Just two people sharing perspectives. IR." That same day, Michael received a succinct email from Avery. "Isaiah made this decision independently. I'll respect his choice, but will remain vigilant. He doesn't need a father now. He needed one 15 years ago. If you're seeking redemption, understand it won't come from us. Any relationship you develop will be on his terms, not yours. Not from vengeance, but because he deserves this power of choice that you tried to take from us years ago." Sitting in his new modest apartment, looking out at the city he once considered beneath his status, Michael Thornton finally understood the magnitude of his error. He hadn't just abandoned a pregnant woman, he had rejected the opportunity to participate in raising an extraordinary son and building a life alongside a woman whose strength and vision exceeded any expectation. The morning after Isaiah's unexpected message arrived, Michael sat at his kitchen table staring at the card as sunlight streamed through unfamiliar windows. His new apartment, a modest 2-bedroom in a middle-class Nashville neighborhood, felt worlds away from the penthouse he'd occupied just months earlier. The furnishings were sparse. He hadn't bothered replacing much after the move. What was the point of luxury when there was no one to impress? His phone buzzed with a news alert. Reynolds Tech announces groundbreaking partnership with Microsoft. He clicked through to find Avery and Isaiah smiling in a professional photograph standing alongside Microsoft's CEO. The caption identified Isaiah as Chief Innovation Officer despite his youth, noting that Harvard had created a special arrangement allowing him to fulfill both academic and corporate responsibilities. Michael's thumb hovered over Isaiah's card. Scientific curiosity about nature versus nurture, not obligation or expectation. The clinical precision of the language was so clearly Thornton, the same analytical approach Michael had inherited from his father and grandfather. Yet the compassionate openness to connection despite past wounds, that had to be Avery's influence. His musings were interrupted by a call from his father. Michael almost declined it, but old habits died hard. "The board meeting is this afternoon," Edward Thornton said without greeting. "They're voting on the restructuring plan." "I'm not part of the company anymore, Dad," Michael reminded him. "You made that quite clear." "This affects your trust fund," his father replied coldly. "The family holdings may need to be liquidated to shore up operating capital." The news should have devastated him. Just months ago, The prospect of losing his inheritance would have seemed apocalyptic. Now it barely registered. "Do what you need to do," Michael said, surprising himself with his detachment. A long silence followed before his father spoke again. "I've been thinking about that boy. Your son." "Isaiah," Michael corrected. "His name is Isaiah. He has Thornton blood. The genetic aptitude is obvious. That mathematical intelligence runs in our line." Michael felt a flare of anger. "If you're suggesting some kind of claim, don't be ridiculous," his father interrupted. "That bridge is ash. I'm merely observing that the one worthwhile thing you've contributed to this world is a child you rejected. There's a certain Greek tragedy to it." After hanging up, Michael found himself searching online for more information about Isaiah. The results revealed a staggering list of accomplishments: published papers in peer-reviewed journals, patents registered when he was just 12, speaking engagements at international technology conferences. In every photograph, the resemblance to the Thornton men was unmistakable, yet Isaiah's expression held something Michael had never seen in family portraits: genuine purpose. The media frenzy continued unabated. Each day brought new analyses of the Thornton-Reynolds saga, as business publications had dubbed it. One outlet published side-by-side timelines. Avery's meteoric rise contrasted with Thornton Industries' steady decline. Another ran a feature examining how Reynolds Tech's focus on accessibility and adaptive technology represented a value system diametrically opposed to the traditional manufacturing ethos of Thornton Industries. What stung most were the character assessments. Commentators dissected Michael's behavior 15 years ago as emblematic of privileged entitlement, contrasting it with Avery's perseverance against overwhelming odds. One particularly devastating analysis in Harvard Business Review suggested the story represented a paradigm shift in American business culture, from inherited privilege to earned merit, from extraction to creation. Michael's response to Isaiah sat unwritten for 3 days. What could he possibly say that wouldn't sound self-serving or pathetic? Finally, he settled on simple truth. "I would be honored to meet on your terms. You owe me nothing, but I owe you everything I can offer, even if that's just honest answers to whatever questions you might have." Michael Thornton. The first meeting was set for the following month at a neutral location, a quiet restaurant in Midtown Manhattan, selected by Isaiah. Michael arrived 30 minutes early, his stomach twisted with anxiety. He'd changed his shirt twice before leaving his hotel, absurdly concerned with making a good impression on a teenager he had no right to impress. Isaiah arrived precisely on time, alone. He wore a simple but impeccably tailored navy suit that made him look older than his 15 years. His composed demeanor as he navigated to the table reminded Michael painfully of his own father in business settings: economy of movement, observant eyes, confidence without swagger. "Mr. Thornton," Isaiah greeted him with a formal handshake. "Thank you for suggesting this," Michael replied, trying to mask his nervousness. "And please, call me Michael." Their conversation began awkwardly, with careful navigation around the enormous emotional chasm between them. Isaiah asked pointed questions about the Thornton family medical history, clearly compiling data for his nature versus nurture analysis. Michael answered everything honestly, occasionally offering glimpses into his own childhood, the pressure of dynastic expectations, the emotional austerity of the Thornton household. "You mentioned you barely got into Vanderbilt," Isaiah noted, referencing their brief exchange in Avery's apartment. "Yet your IQ tests must have been well above average given our family pattern. What interfered with your academic performance?" The clinical detachment of the question couldn't mask its insight. Michael considered deflecting, then remembered his commitment to honesty. "Fear of failure," he admitted. "When success is the only acceptable outcome, the safest strategy is minimal risk. I did exactly enough to maintain status, never enough to risk genuine failure." Isaiah nodded thoughtfully. "Whereas my mother encouraged experimentation and valued learning from mistakes." "She's remarkable," Michael said quietly. I didn't see it then. No, Isaiah agreed, his gaze direct. You didn't. As their lunch concluded, Isaiah stood to leave, then hesitated. I have a question that's not related to genetic inheritance. Anything, Michael promised. Did you ever think about me? Before the business forum, I mean? Did you ever wonder who I might have become? The question pierced Michael like a physical blow. The truth was shameful, but he had promised honesty. Not often enough, he admitted. I compartmentalized you out of existence. It was easier than confronting what I'd done. Isaiah absorbed this with remarkable composure. Thank you for your candor. Same time next month? While Isaiah navigated this complex new relationship, Avery faced her own emotional reckoning. The Forbes cover story hit newsstands worldwide, positioning the Reynolds dynasty as the future of ethical technology development. The 8-page feature detailed their journey from poverty to industry leadership, celebrating their focus on creating technology that served overlooked populations. The morning the issue was published, Avery found herself unexpectedly emotional. Sophia Zhang called to congratulate her, only to find Avery fighting tears. What's wrong? Sophia asked, concerned. This is everything you've worked for. That's just it, Avery replied. I kept telling myself I was building this for Isaiah to prove Michael wrong. But somewhere along the way it became about something larger, creating technology that actually helps people, that sees those society overlooks. That's why you succeeded, Sophia observed. Revenge is a powerful starter fuel, but purpose is what sustains. When Isaiah returned from his lunch with Michael, Avery was waiting in their living room, trying to appear casual despite her anxiety. How was it? She asked carefully. Informative, Isaiah replied, his default assessment for new experiences. He appears genuinely remorseful, though that's statistically expected given the public relations disaster he's experiencing. Avery smiled despite herself. Only her son would analyze emotional interactions with such scientific detachment. And how do you feel about it? She pressed gently. Isaiah considered this with characteristic thoroughness. I'm processing multiple conflicting responses. Intellectually, I'm fascinated by the genetic similarities. We share certain cognitive patterns and mannerisms. Emotionally, he paused, showing rare uncertainty. I don't know what I want from him, if anything, but I want the choice to be mine. It is, Avery assured him, pulling him into a hug. It absolutely is. The following weeks brought unexpected developments. A major investment firm approached Thornton Industries with a hostile takeover bid, capitalizing on its weakened market position. The business media covered the potential acquisition with barely disguised glee, noting that the firm planned to dismantle the company and sell its divisions piecemeal. Michael, despite his formal separation from the company, found himself devastated by the prospect. 3 generations of family history, a manufacturing legacy that had once employed thousands, reduced to corporate scrap. In desperation, he reached out to former contacts, seeking alternative investors who might preserve some portion of the company's operations. During their second monthly lunch, Isaiah noticed Michael's distraction. You're concerned about Thornton Industries, he observed. Michael nodded, seeing no point in denial. 163 years of history about to be erased. The Adaptive Interface Division has potential, Isaiah remarked casually. Your team's approach to vehicular control systems for disabled drivers is conceptually sound, though the implementation is outdated. Michael looked up sharply. You've researched our products? Due diligence, Isaiah replied with a slight shrug. I was curious about my genetic heritage's business focus. Later that evening, Isaiah approached Avery in her home office. I've been analyzing Thornton Industries' technical assets, he began without preamble. Avery set down her tablet. For what purpose? Their Adaptive Vehicle Controls division has complementary technology to our mobility interface systems. With proper integration and modernization, It could expand our market reach into transportation accessibility. Avery studied her son carefully. Are you suggesting we acquire part of Thornton Industries? A strategic asset acquisition would be logical, Isaiah replied, his tone deliberately neutral. From a purely business perspective, Avery wasn't fooled by his clinical framing. And from a personal perspective, Isaiah hesitated. It would preserve something of value from that legacy while transforming it into something better, something that actually helps people. The symbolism wasn't lost on Avery. I'll have Jacob run the numbers, she promised. 2 weeks later, Reynolds Tech announced a targeted acquisition of Thornton Industries' Adaptive Controls division, outbidding the corporate raiders for that specific unit. Business analysts noted the strategic fit with Reynolds Tech's accessibility focus, praising the move as both financially sound and mission-aligned. For Michael, the news arrived via text message from Isaiah. We're preserving what had potential and transforming it into something worthy. Perhaps there's a metaphor there. 6 months after their first confrontation at the Metropolitan Business Forum, Avery stood on the terrace of her Manhattan apartment, watching the sunset paint the city skyline in shades of amber and gold. Isaiah joined her, tablet in hand as always, but set it aside to enjoy the view. "Worth it?" he asked, echoing a question she often posed during their late-night conversations about business decisions. Avery understood he wasn't asking about the recent acquisition, but about the entire 15-year journey that had brought them here. "Every second," she replied, wrapping an arm around his shoulders. "Every tear, every moment of doubt. We built something extraordinary together, my son. Something that no one can ever take from us." In the distance, the Reynolds Tech logo illuminated on their Chelsea headquarters, visible even from this distance. The sign represented not a vendetta against Michael, but a testament to what determination, intelligence, and the unwavering love for her child had accomplished against impossible odds. "We're just getting started," Isaiah said, his expression reflecting the same quiet determination that had carried Avery through her darkest moments. She smiled, embracing her son, her greatest triumph, her greatest joy. On the horizon, the city lights glittered like stars within reach, not unlike the dreams Avery had transformed into reality, against all probabilities, with nothing but determination, intelligence, and the unshakable love for her son. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen.